Why don't we see teen moms on Degrassi raising their child for an extended period of time on the show? That's a good question, and let's talk about that coming up. Hey, I'm Kerry from DegrassiBlog.com, and welcome to another edition of Degrassi Corner. Now, usually on Mondays I release a news version of this, but other than Stefan talking about how he watched the trailers for Degrassi Next Class Season 3, there wasn't a lot of news happening in the Degrassian world, so I have a regular commentary for you this week. Today we are talking about a question I saw recently. Some people were talking about some things that they wanted to see on Degrassi in the future, and people were asking, well, why doesn't Degrassi do a teen mom storyline? Now, before somebody jumps into the comments and says, well, Mia was a teen mom in Season 6. Yes, we know that Mia was a teen mom, and I'll talk about that a little later. But the question that these people were asking specifically is, why don't we see someone get pregnant on Degrassi, then give birth to the baby on the show, and then we watch them raise that baby on the show until they're no longer on the show? Spike Nelson is the only character on Degrassi to have done that, not once, but twice, actually. They had her, of course, have Emma in Degrassi Junior High back in the 80s, and then she also had her son, Jack, in Season 3 of The Next Generation, and we watched her raise Jack from that point until the point where they basically wrote him and her off of the show. But there have been multiple teen pregnancies in the, what I'm calling the TNG era, which would be Season 1 through now. And the results have been basically we had a couple of adoptions, we've had an abortion, we're actually having another abortion happening in the upcoming season of Degrassi Next Class, which will be Season 3, and then we had Claire's miscarriage in Season 14. I think it's pretty safe to say that over the last 15 years, Degrassi's writers and producers have discussed what I'm going to call a keep the baby storyline at least one time over those 15 years. So they've had all these pregnancies over that time period, 15 years, and they haven't done a keep the baby storyline yet. Well, I mean, they're basically just waving a red flag in our face that says there is a specific reason or specific set of reasons as to why they haven't done it yet. Now, I have a couple of theories, but which are actually more like questions to raise about why they probably haven't done a keep the baby storyline in the TNG era. And before we get into that, just want to remind you, for the most part, when it comes to talking about Degrassi, one thing that Degrassi fans never, ever seem to take into account when it comes to talking about the show are the technical aspects of the show. And I think that's one thing that you always need to keep in the back of your head. And when I'm talking about the technical aspects of the show, I mean the actual behind the scenes logistics as to why things happen or don't happen on the show. One of the biggest examples of that actually is the death of Adam Torres in Season 13. That was not a situation where they were just sitting around brainstorming for Season 13 and they were like, you know what, we killed a character already in Season 12, let's just go ahead and kill off this groundbreaking transgender character. That was a weird situation, behind the scenes stuff happening. They're basically having to write off a character and they have limited options in how to do that. And we were sort of stuck with, well, you saw what happened. But getting back to the keeping the baby storyline, and I'm just gonna refer to it as that, just to keep it simple. A question I think we should be asking is, does Degrassi want to lock in a character into a long-term storyline like that? And just guessing on what we've seen over the past 15 years, my answer would lean toward no. Not to say that long-term arcs don't happen. As a matter of fact, some really great long-term arcs have happened recently in the most recent seasons of Degrassi. We had Maya, when her boyfriend Cam died in Season 12, we watched her suffer still with the trauma of that situation in Season 13 and Season 14. And then Miles Hollingsworth, we saw him dealing with his daddy issues for several seasons as well. But those two arcs differ in the fact that they had the option to do other things or to just sort of go in a different direction with those characters' storylines if they wanted to. But if you have a keeping the baby storyline and you have the character there and maybe the show doesn't want to do the storyline anymore, or they maybe want to utilize the character for something else, then you have this weird scenario where you're basically having to blatantly place that keeping the baby storyline on the shelf. And that leads me to, finally, Mia Jones. If you don't know who she is, if you don't know about the early seasons of The Next Generation, she was the teen mom character. She came onto the show in season 6, and she came onto the show as a teen mom. We found out that she had a baby when she was like 13 or 14. So when she joined Degrassi, her daughter Isabella was like 3 or 4 years old already. So season 6 and 7, those are basically the years. Her storyline is basically she's the teen mom who wants to be a normal teenager. But then all of a sudden in season 8, things start to change a little bit. In that first episode of season 8, Mia's mother just so happens to conveniently mention that she has started working from home. And then she just so happens to conveniently tell Mia that she is willing to help take care of Isabella more. And then we conveniently hear her tell Mia that she wants Mia to have some free time to make junior year, quote, her year. And then basically from season 8 until the time she left the show, in like season 9, Degrassi is free to use her as they wish, and they used her as the alpha female on Degrassi. Then in season 11, we saw Jenna and KC raising their son Tyson together as a couple for about half of the season. About 20 episodes was spent on their storyline. And basically we saw them dealing with the struggles of balancing both their personal lives and trying to raise a child at the same time. And the end result was they were both just too overwhelmed with it all. And that's why they gave Tyson up for adoption. Now, if you knew absolutely nothing about what was going to happen in the future of that storyline while you were watching it, one of the key things that gave it away that they were going to eventually give Tyson up for adoption is the fact that both of these characters, mostly Jenna though, were sort of isolated away from Degrassi, the actual school itself. If you're a longtime viewer of this show, one of the golden rules of Degrassi is the fact that the characters need to be at the school and that they need to be actively involved at the school to some extent. And in that storyline, while Casey was, he was sort of there at Degrassi still, but he was mostly working, Jenna was basically stuck at home. And there was no way that they would keep, her character locked into that type of role for however many seasons that she would have been still on the show. Another question, or I guess concern, is the repetitiveness from, a writer's standpoint of trying to figure out how to tell multiple stories over the course of several seasons about being a teen parent. It's one thing for them to write an arc like they did in season 11 of The Next Generation, and that arc only lasted 20 episodes for Casey and Jenna as they raise their son Tyson. But what happens if you extend that all the way through the entire season 11, which was 45 episodes, and then you extend that all the way through season 12, which was another 40 episodes, then season 13, and then just add on for fun season 14, which was another core 24 episodes. Not only do you have the task of trying to make sure that keep the baby storyline remains fresh season after season, but of course there are, once again, going back to the logistical aspects of things, making sure that things work in order to make sure that you can keep, those characters, like a Jenna and Casey, actively involved with all of the other characters in the Degrassi universe. Spike, back in Degrassi Junior High, the end of season 3, she was at a point where she was almost about to drop out of school. That's how overwhelmed she was with being a teen mom. But then the next season, the show transitions over to Degrassi High, and the new high school that they go to, it just so happens to conveniently have a daycare right there in the school. Another reason that I think there might be a little issue, or a thing that needs to be questioned when it comes to trying to have a keep the baby storyline on Degrassi, is simply put, the timeline on the show. When it comes to the timeline on Degrassi, the timeline is literally whatever Degrassi wants it to be. Like, for instance, season 13 and 14, both of those seasons were one gigantic school year that spanned the course of 2 real life years. And, that's like over 60 episodes, almost damn near 70 episodes that they spent in one entire school year, which, the early days of TNG, one school year, they would cover that in like 20 episodes. And of course, there are time markers in the Degrassi universe. You have, like the winter break, fall break, in the school year, things like that. However, does a baby, if you introduce a baby into the Degrassi universe, does that baby, that child itself, become sort of a natural, consistent marker of the progression of time in the Degrassi universe? And then it becomes a question of, well, how long is Degrassi going to show this teenage character raising a child in the baby stage? Or do we, accelerate time in the Degrassi universe so that we can also see them raising the kid as a toddler? Or what? It not only has an impact on, like, say, that one specific keeping the baby storyline, and that also impacts all of the other storylines that they're telling in that, any given season, and then any future storylines that they're trying to tell while that child is still on the show. But basically, that's about it. I think I might have gotten a little too deep into that. But basically, to recap, the questions about whether or not Degrassi should do a keeping the baby storyline, some things to think about. Does Degrassi want to lock a character into that kind of permanent storyline that will last seasons and seasons for however long that character is on the show? And also, there are concerns about the timeline and how that plays into not just that storyline, the keeping the baby storyline, but also all of the other storylines that Degrassi wants to tell as long as that child is on the show. Personally, I would love to see it. If they can pull it off, I would love to see it. It's been however many years since we saw Mia be a teen mom, and then of course Spike Nelson was a teen mom on Degrassi Junior High. I think it would be interesting to see how they would handle that type of storyline nowadays, because even season 11 was only a couple years ago. Jenna and KC doing their teen parent storyline, but Degrassi has changed quite a bit since then, and I'm not just talking about the characters on the show changing. The show itself and how they tell the stories has changed. Questions, thoughts, comments, you can leave all of those in the comments section below, and I will see you on the next edition of Degrassi Corner.